Hi, my name is Diana Catlin, and I am so thrilled to be here to chat with you, sharing some of the tombstones I've come to love and projects that have created amazement in my heart. I am a family genealogist and storyteller. Today, we'll be talking about cemeteries and tombstones. Now, I'm going to share my screen. Number 2, there we go. You should be seeing one of my favorite cemeteries that I hope to visit someday. It is called the Mary Cemetery and is found in Romania. Isn't it bright and inviting? Graveyards have so many meanings for us all. They are often portrayed as holy ground, well kept and groomed when adjacent to a church, or they can be lonely places when left forgotten in the woods. And often they are shown as frightening places of sheer terror in movies. Some people find cemeteries provide the perfect space in which to contemplate, and others are simply creeped out by them. Today, I hope to provide a few ideas to show how we might be more aware of the wealth of information available to us from the tombstones, and perhaps come to love cemeteries and begin to seek the treasures that can be found there. I often use the words cemetery and graveyard interchangeably, but to be precise, I thought I'd start with defining them both properly. Both words refer to a place where we bury our dead, but those two words differ in location, space, and religious requirements, and there are requirements for the headstones too. Let's begin with graveyard. Graveyards tend to be smaller because they are usually affiliated with a church, which often has limited land available. With this limited resource, the rules normally allowed only members of that faith to be buried there. Sometimes only members of that very specific parish could be. I love the history and story behind the words we use. Graveyard is the older of these two words. The word grave comes from the Germanic word graven, which means to dig. The word yard is defined as a small, usually a walled area with its buildings set aside for specific activities. So a graveyard is a place where people dig, thus creating a yard filled with graves, hence graveyard. Graveyards, being under the care of specific organizations, often regulate what kind of inscriptions or epitaphs can be written on the stones. And finally, they may dictate details of the color of the stones, requiring them to be unpolished and may even discourage more elaborate memorials. Within the realm of requirements for the headstone, they may even require the marker to be of granite or of a natural stone. As stated above, a cemetery is also a place where people are buried. As a rule, they are not associated with a church and are much larger, not being confined to the space of a single churchyard. All denominations, both religious and non-believers, can be buried there. Cemeteries became necessary when graveyards simply couldn't handle the demands of the increased populations. Their plots were filled up, often at least 2 deep, and the crypts under the church itself were more than filled, and there simply wasn't any more room. Consequently, the idea for burials not affiliated with a particular faith came into being. Cemeteries often have fewer headstone restrictions than graveyards, so you can create your loved one's memorial as simply as desired or as ornate. Just remember, cemeteries are responsible for setting the standard on materials permitted and size of the markers. They also have standards on what is appropriate to adorn the face of the marker. Consequently, it's helpful to check out these details prior to choosing a plot. In our home, I am sometimes responsible for about 10 grandchildren as various daughters decide to have girls' time out. So I'll load up my vehicle and take them to the cemetery for yet another experience in family history. Last February, we did chalk rubbings. We experimented with chalk, crayons, pencils, and pens. How did they work out for us? Pens weren't effective at all. Pencils were better than pens, but unless held sideways, they weren't much better, and we found that crayons were wonderful, as was dark chalk. The result of this trip was an awareness that stones need care, and if no one takes care of these stones, then the grass and time will simply cover them up and erode them away, and no one will remember them anymore. My grandson Daniel found this particularly disturbing. He and Rhiannon were horrified to think that the stones we were observing might no longer be there in a few years. They became very aware of the mortality of the tombstone and the importance of care and preservation. It taught a perfect lesson and had an enormous emotional impact that could never have been duplicated in my living room. How did the stone break? Rhiannon asked me. And there is so much to teach her about weathering, from chemical and physical and biological processes. We spoke about two possibilities. It could have been broken by being stepped on, either carelessly or deliberately, or there could have been roots eating away at it from the base while the rain eroded it from the top. When that happens, the stones can become weak and break away. Sometimes as we drive past a cemetery, we'll chat about cemetery etiquette. Be sympathetic. People come to remember the time they spent with a loved one. You may see them at a gravestone or nameplate talking to them, and this is normal and even encouraged. Be respectful. Keep the volume of voices down. You don't have to whisper, just be mindful of the others, and do your best not to walk on the grave. Common sense usually leads to seeing where to walk in between headstones and avoiding the basic shape of the grave. We're taught not to stand on top of someone's burial space. Follow the cemetery rules. Most cemeteries are open from dawn to dusk, and it's best to leave it alone after dark. Don't litter. Like the Boy Scouts, please pack out what you have packed in. This is not, of course, a comprehensive list, but it's a good place to begin and covers the basics. I believe if we discuss these things from time to time, it will simply become a part of who we are. Aren't kids wonderful? We're going to chat for a moment more about tombstones, time frames, and then some of the symbols you might find and what they mean. I was fascinated to learn a little about headstones and what they were made of and how they changed over the centuries. The following information was gathered from both the Family Tree magazine blog and from Atlas Preservation's blog regarding American gravestone evolution. Links to the articles and photos can be found on the handout. Before the 1650s, there were no professional stoneworkers to hire here, and the earliest American grave markers were usually simple, carved from locally available materials. Often these were simple, unassuming wooden memorials. Additionally, field stones or rough-cut rocks were also used to mark graves. A stone from this time period might have just the deceased's initials and the death year carved on it. From about the 1660s to the 1850s, headstones consisted of sedimentary rocks such as red or brown sandstone, limestone, soapstone, and slate. These materials were easier to cut and to carve. The primary style of gravestone in this time was a tablet stone, which was placed vertically and upright. I had no idea that only about 2/3 of the stone is actually visible, since 1/3 of the stone was underground. I had never given a thought to about how it was anchored to stand upright before. Now, between the 1830s and the 1880s, marble became popular. Marble is considered more durable than both limestone and sandstone, and marble's lighter colors made for stunning headstones. Since the 1880s and early 1900s, the stone of choice has been granite. This is a photo of my husband, James, with two of our children, Jennifer and Ben. We found this marker in the Ness Cemetery in Elbow Lake, Minnesota, as we searched for James's great-grandfather, Knut Soland. He was born in 1820 in Sigdal, Buskerud, Norway. He died in 1908. Now, we don't know when his marker was placed, and at the time, we weren't researching gravestone materials. By the timelines I've discovered, and we've just reviewed, this is most likely granite. Now that we know the time frame for when certain stones were used, walking through a cemetery has become even more fascinating. So the next time you happen upon a granite stone in America with a pre-1880 death date, you'll know it is not likely to be the original marker. Isn't it fun to know details like this? Please note, though, that these are good guidelines, but it does vary significantly depending on the region. The East Coast developed much differently than the West, and the areas around original rock quarries didn't have the same concerns as the localities without them. And my husband also reminds me that the further something was from the train stations and the busy towns, the more slowly the change to the new stone sources versus the local sources would have occurred. Through the centuries, perception of death and our attitudes toward it have been evolving. For instance, when I was in Maryland this past summer, I was in a much older graveyard. I came across a bold skull and crossbones on both the husband and his wife's gravestones. There was also something that looked like an hourglass. I just had to take photos, and then I found some better ones online as I searched for more detail. I learned that the Puritans viewed death much like they did life, with stark reality and no frills. Death was simply part of their daily lives, and they believed that their salvation was never certain. There was minimal ceremony at the passing of a loved one because public expressions of sadness were considered inappropriate. They firmly believed in reminding themselves of their mortality with the phrase memento mori, which translates from the Latin to remember that you will die. As such, their tombstones portrayed the seriousness of life, and they believed that contemplation of one's own mortality was good for the soul. They all knew that life was short and Judgment Day was coming fast, so you'd better be good. Life expectancy in the 1700s was a mere 35 years. There are so many symbols that show the passing of time on tombstones. The skull here is a great example of the theme memento mori. The hourglass shows us that time is running out. I found this photo on a website for Grove, Oklahoma. It shows an interesting blend of not only the scythe, but an arrow too. The scythe was frequently paired with arrows, darts, spears, or crossbows, which were also weapons of death. The scythe represents the reaping of life, and that we need to remember that our time is coming more quickly than we might wish. This hourglass is beautifully centered, reminding us that our time is short. There appears to be an all-seeing eye up at the very top, symbolizing the all-knowing God, and the radiating rays of light symbolize the holiness of the true God. This photo was taken in St. Cuthbert Kirkyard. It was taken by Leo Reynolds and is posted on his wordsonstone.wordpress.com website. He describes the tombstone on the left as follows. The natural patina is a result of moss growing in the damp climate, with further erosion damage due to the extremes of the Scottish weather. Erosion of the stone has obliterated much of the original inscription. The symbols on this headstone represent several aspects of memento mori. The winged effigy represents the deceased soul in flight. The banner, of course, is a reminder that death is unavoidable. Skulls are the representation of death, mortality, penitence, and sin. Arched columns symbolize the passage to heaven, and the drapes represent mourning and the partition between life and death. In the next example on the right, you can see the reversed N in the words memento mori. Now, Leo states that he can find no reason for the reversal except possibly one, illiteracy, or two, perhaps it's just a letter formed and used during that period of time. For example, F, J, and V were used to represent S, I, and U. The symbolism on this headstone marks the passage of time and the inevitability of death. Bones are for mortality and death. The hourglass, passage of time, and the rosettes, brevity of earthly existence. Many sayings, poems, and limericks were created to help us remember this too, and perhaps to help us smile in spite of the seriousness of the message, although I doubt the Puritans had that thought. Although I won't spend much time on epitaphs here, it does bear touching on. This is one of my favorites. Remember me as you pass by. As you are now, so once was I. As I am now, you soon must be. Prepare for death and follow me. Another one reads, my glass is run and yours is running. Mind death, for the judgment's coming. These do make one pause and contemplate for a bit, don't you think? On a less somber note, in a cemetery in the remote hills of Utah, I found grave markers brimming with messages of hope and love, both for the one who left and messages to those still living. It was one of the best field trips our family had ever taken. I thought I'd share a precious photo with you. I believe it was the artwork of the young woman who passed away when she was only 20, and it touched my heart. There are many iterations of the skull. I love how over time the serious skull and crossbones began to be replaced by the winged skull, symbolizing how the soul is now free and taken up into heaven as it flies away, journeying into the new realm. You have achieved triumph over death. That gives us hope. As these bold carvings became less prominent, stars, vines, and flowers began to emerge to show that life continues in spite of death. This transition occurred as the 1800s became history, and memento mori fell out of favor in tombstone carvings. Our last family history field trip began with a visit to a local graveyard with one goal in mind. What symbols, signs, and odd names, etc., could we find that we hadn't seen before? My grandson Owen was with me and was thrilled to meet some of his long ago relatives. He looks pretty comfortable in the cemetery with me. So what did we find in our graveyard treasure hunt? First of all, we found angels. What do angels mean when discovered in a graveyard? During times of immense loss or grief, we tend to seek comfort and peace. Angels are often portrayed as protective. Angels represent a connection between us and heaven. They also bring peace, knowledge, faith, and strength. Angel monuments are found in numerous poses, each one having a unique personal message for those remaining. Some are praying, which can signify devotion to God, or a petition for both those who have died and those who remain behind. Some are pointing to heaven, as these angels are, becoming our guide to show us the way home. Some angels have a head bowed and could represent mourning. I've seen angels depicted weeping. There are angels with swords defending and protecting. They can also represent justice and vengeance. This angel was specially commissioned by a grieving widow to help her remember that justice and vengeance will come to those who deserve it. The business partner who caused her husband's death would reap what he was due. This angel brought her comfort while sending a message. Sometimes we see angels as our special guardians. There are many statues where a child is shown with their guardian angel guiding them to their heavenly home. In fact, here in Utah, every year on December 6th, hundreds of people gather in the Salt Lake City Cemetery with the Christmas box Angel of Hope statue. There's a candlelight healing seminary to remember their loved ones, specifically children, who have left the earth too soon. When the short ceremony is completed, everyone who chooses to do so lays a white rose at the base of the angel. It provides a place to contemplate and heal the sorrow of loss and provide support for those who are still grieving. I've been to this monument with one of my beloved nephews. Next, in our treasure hunt, we searched for and found a multitude of religious symbols. A religious symbol is defined as an iconic representation intended to represent a specific religion or a specific concept from a given religion. Where we reside in Ogden, Utah, the most common religious symbols we found were variations of the Christian cross. The United States military officially recognizes over 100 religious symbols and systems of belief on their tombstones. I've included a link below in the handout, which takes you to the United States Department of Veteran Affairs site if you wish to view them all. We looked for veteran stones so we could find as many as possible. We found the Latin cross, very simple with clean lines. We also found it surrounded by flowers as well as with praying hands. We also found it centered in a heart at the end of rosary beads. We did not find the Presbyterian cross or the Lutheran cross or the Episcopal cross. We found several others, but these specifically from the Veterans site were not available to us in that particular cemetery that day. We did find a Star of David, which led us to study more deeply. Common symbols we found on Jewish tombstones include the menorah, a Levite pitcher, and Kohanim hands as well, where the thumbs and the forefingers are touching. We found tombstones with only Asian writing in a tiny cemetery in the middle of southern Utah. We've seen many languages and artistic themes, all contained within the same graveyard. There is so much beauty to discover and preserve. One of the religious symbols we also discovered in this cemetery belonged to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. The children found the angel Moroni on many headstones. Temples were also frequently discovered, and we found the Salt Lake Temple as well as the Ogden and Logan temples too. We continued our search, beginning to branch out to clubs, societies, and fraternities. This is by no means a comprehensive list. The possibilities are so many and varied, and some of the groups that we hope to find were perhaps the American Legion, the Boy Scouts and Girl Scouts, the Freemasons, the Fraternal Order of the Eagles, Independent Order of Odd Fellows, Shriners, and Woodmen of the World. The kids found the Freemasons. They have more than 6 million members worldwide and seem to be the largest and most widely known fraternity. For the Freemasons, the compass and square with the letter G, which stands for God in geometry, is a common symbol on tombstones. A belief in God is the first requirement to have membership in this group. Additionally, geometry is said to help unravel the wonders and mysteries of nature and the universe. The square reminds them to keep their actions square and true with God and all mankind. It represents fairness, stability, balance, and having a solid foundation. Together, The compass and the square represent both earthly and spiritual responsibilities. They must do well by mankind on earth, keeping an eye on the eternal perspective as well, knowing they are preparing to meet God one day. The all-seeing eye is another Masonic symbol. God is considered to be the architect of the universe. The Masons strive to become architects as well, diligently using the tools God has given them to create the best foundation for a good life, for themselves and for others. Next time you are in a cemetery, keep an eye out for the Masonic symbols, and you are very likely to come across them. Something that was very interesting to me was the letters on this particular tombstone. It's ITNOTGAOTU. I didn't know what that meant right away. It means in the name of the great architect of the universe. That is so beautiful. Iris found a symbol we had not seen before. So when we got home, we looked it up. This is the religious symbol for one who was a Buddhist, and this represents the wheel of righteousness. We found clasped hands, or the handshake symbol, all over the place. Many tombstones contain carvings of the human hand, but we became interested and fascinated with the handshake. This symbol was very interesting, and there are such tiny changes in various details of it that it merits a closer look. For example, the hands might be identical. They also might distinctly show one hand is feminine and the other is masculine. The fingers might be left straight or be curved around one another. In this photo, 3 are curved around the other hand and the pinky finger is straight. If you find the hands with cuffs, those also have significant meanings. Additionally, you need to notice if they reach out to each other on the same horizontal line, or if one appears to be more elevated than the other one. 2 clasped hands found on the same level with cuffs matching exactly might represent a farewell or goodbye to earthly things in life. It might also represent a welcome to eternal life. If one cuff seems to be more feminine than the other, this typically represents a close emotional tie between partners or a mother and child, despite death having separated them temporarily. It could mean the continuation of love and affection, eternal devotion, whether or not one remains behind, and again, guidance to the everlasting life by one who's waiting for you to arrive. And again, without changing anything from what we've discussed above, if one side truly is shown higher than the other one, it may represent the hand of God reaching out to guide the deceased to heaven, a warm greeting from a previously deceased partner, and again, guidance by one deceased person to the newly deceased together on their journey heavenward. I will state that these symbols are so very artistic, and as in the nature of art, many tombstone symbols remain and will always be defined by the eye of the beholder. I think my favorite pair of clasped hands comes from a graveyard in Holland. It's a beautiful love story entwined in an historically impossible situation. You see, in 1842, 33-year-old Colonel Jacobus van Gorkum in the Dutch cavalry married the love of his life, a beautiful 22-year-old lady named Josephina van Afferden. If I got it wrong, please excuse me. Afferden. The first challenge to this union came about because his station in life as a common cavalryman was beneath her station as a noblewoman. This alone was cause for outrageous controversy. And then to complicate matters further, she was a Catholic and he was a Protestant. This was a scandal and an enormous problem. In spite of the culture of the time, they defied every critic and remained married for nearly 40 years. He passed away in 1880. The separation between religious groups was taken very seriously. Even in death, their remains were subject to absolute religious divide, not only socially and politically, but still physically as well. Due to this segregation, they couldn't be buried together in her Catholic family plot. However, being a bright, creative woman, she buried her husband on the edge of the Protestant section, and according to the story on the website, Burials and Beyond, she ensured that his plot backed onto that of her family's. She ordered 2 matching large white memorials, the headstones towering above the dividing wall, leaving a space between the 2. The tombstones were separated by a high wall, a divided culture, divided political landscape, and clearly segregated religions, as well as a defined class system that created marked sections in the center of the cemetery for specific levels of income. How did she overcome this? Here, the 2 plots were joined by a pair of hands connecting over the brick wall divider, one masculine and one feminine, holding together now forever. Van Gorkum is buried beneath the hand, sporting a man's shirt cuff, and Josefina is buried beneath the hand, shown with a ruffled, delicate cuff. True love will conquer. I have yet to find a weeping willow on a tombstone. That doesn't mean there haven't been some in my graveyards. It merely means I haven't been looking for one until recently, so I never noticed. These were really popular in the early 1800s. They range from stylized trees to some so real you could hear their leaves rustle in the wind. What does a weeping willow symbolize on a tombstone? It sometimes symbolizes tears, grief, or sadness, but it also represents happiness and even immortality. Why on earth does it have this wide range of emotions attached to it? I used to have a weeping willow growing in our backyard. It grew quickly and was very durable. Did you know that the branches can lie on the ground for months and still become a tree when planted? Long, long ago, my brother and I were building a fence, and when we didn't have any more poles, we grabbed some branches lying on the ground nearby that were about the right size. It wasn't too long before we discovered the logs that we had put in the ground had sprouted leaves and become trees. That's one of the reasons a weeping willow can symbolize life after death and the resurrection. Preserving, documenting, and photographing graveyards is one of my favorite things to do. I joined Find a Grave in 2010, and that was 15 years after it had been started. I had a landline and an old flip phone. With those 2 things, I really had to work hard to contribute, and getting my old phone to network properly with the computer was really a challenge. The day that I got 35 photos from a cemetery to upload all at once was a total thrill. What an accomplishment. I cheered. Fast forward 11 years to 2021. I'd like to share a story with you of one Eagle Scout with an amazing mission and the family that supported him, helping him reach his goal. John is a 14-year-old Eagle Scout. He's an accomplished young man who has earned his ham radio license, dances with his sister, and loves making crocheted rugs. He has worked hard to reach these milestones in his young life. When his family was helping him look for an Eagle project, they turned to Billion Graves. You see, Billion Graves has this really neat perk when you contribute to their database. As you take the photo and the GPS coordinates, it places this wonderful little golden marker on the cemetery map. For those who like to check things off on a to-do list, this really lets you quantify and visualize your progress. When John's mom shared his story with me, she began with this map. It shows the Baltimore National Cemetery in Maryland. There were a few digital yellow markers in various places, but overall the cemetery hadn't been documented. They decided to do something about it. Together, they marshaled volunteers for a specific event day. In preparation for that day, they went to the cemetery several weeks early and practiced on one of the smaller sections. How long would it take? They felt they had to know this in order to prepare properly for everyone else. They figured out exactly how to quickly and effectively get the best photos and how to optimize the use of the phones to upload the information. John's aunt and several cousins came to support the event with a portable canopy tent and cold drinks for all the volunteers. It was incredibly hot. They came prepared with fully charged portable phone batteries, a map of the place, and were ready to document each section row by row. After working on this for several weekends over the course of several months, their progress began to be visible. This is a screen capture that's not zoomed in yet. Each large dot represents a grouping of photographs taken. It's looking pretty good, right? So how many photographs were taken? Katie's phone on the top right here shows that the contributed images, there were 9,071. And Rosa's phone just below contributed 7,817 images. They uploaded a total of 16,888 photographs. There were a few other phones working at the same time. What an effort, what a tribute to documenting and preserving the headstones of some of our veterans. So what does that look like up close? It looks like this. Nearly all of what we lovingly call the boot is filled in. When I saw this picture, I nearly stopped breathing. The enormity of what they were doing in this cemetery was breathtaking, and it filled my heart with awe, respect, and admiration. As you can see, there are hundreds left to photograph in these remaining spaces right here. But it feels so good to know that so much of this cemetery is completely photographed. Does it stop your heart too? The dedication it took to take this project this far and to earn his eagle is jaw-dropping. I am so proud of John. It just amazes me. And it inspires me. I truly do believe cemeteries, graveyards, and tombstones don't have to be places of desperation and unrelenting sorrow. As we process our grief, there's so much to learn from the messages contained in epitaphs, poems, and artistic ciphers. I feel a unique thrill of anticipation every time I plan a new trip to a new destination and find wonder in the unexpected discovery. Yet my grandson Daniel still offers grave advice. He tells me in his delightful 8-year-old voice, please step out and take more photos. Spend some time to preserve and protect the tombstones. I agree with Daniel with my whole heart. Thank you so much for your time and allowing me to share the deepening love I have for tombstones. I was walking through the cemetery just 2 days ago and saw 2 upside-down torches, and I knew what that meant. It was so exciting. Until next time, I wish you the very best in your family research and projects. Bye for now.